I am reading Francis of the Filth by Filth Frank, and I'll be reading the first chapter straight from the get-go. Without further ado, we'll start reading the first chapter. A long time ago, in a dimension far, far away, there was a collective of midgets fighting over a hummus snack who have nothing at all to do with our story, which really begins in a small and very unhygienic bedroom in what humans call New York. It was at first appearance a common habitat, last Tuesday's ramen floating on the carpet, on the used tissues. Unwashed socks, chewing gum, clogged USB sticks, and bottles of urine stacked up in a pyramid. Poorly written Japanese scrolls hanging on the walls between cracked mirrors, and old proudly displayed high school detention slips, and semen stains on the ceiling. Yet on closer inspection there was, at the same time, something unique about this habitat as well, grotesque to the point of disfigurement, and disconcerting to the point of alarm. There lay in the middle of it all, rather happily, blending in as though one with it, Francis of the Filth. He was covered in nothing but phlegm and a pair of SpongeBob underpants, which could stand out on their own. If you most certainly shatter like glass if it was thrown on a hard surface. There, dead to the world, he was occasionally whimper utterances, which were a window in the mind of Filth that beheld his name and title. No, Jules Santana, please don't touch me there. Female comedians are very funny. Must eat hummus. The other kids won't let me play in the park. It's my turn to ride the chocolate man. The school bus is responsible for their deaths, not me. Yes, it was I who left the steamy supplies. My stepdaughter's a veiny individual. Need more rats. Curiously, and without warning, a second voice could be heard, whispering through the drain-scented air of the room. A chin-chin's grass get a day on. For that moment, the words just floated in the air, like they were struggling to cut through the stench. They were repeated. A chin-chin grass get a day on. This time, they reached the ears of our protagonist. Yet they remained muffled, till instinctively picked at his ear, and pulled out a log of wax the size of a date. A third calling the desired effect, and Frank sat bolt upright, with a terrified look that only comes from hearing Christian rap played in the morning, and seeing the Dark Lord himself. A chin-chin grass get a day on. Parts of the ceiling then opened up like a wet pouch, pulsing and pushing out what looked like, for a lack of a better description, a black fetus. Still screaming, it slid into the ground and began to unfold. Dressed completely in black, it was as though he was the very source of darkness itself. His presence seemed to bring a distortion of the space-time continuum, and he spoke it. Brought both shadows and chills. He prowled slowly before Frank, on all fours like a frog, with chronic arthritis. His tongue occasionally darted in and out in the rhythm of Tourette's like flinching of his tightly wrapped black head. Everything about him indicated dread. His darkness, his movements, his uncut finger and toenails. But most of all, it was his eyes. weird and freaky to the core. They were simultaneously present and earthly, penetrating and all-knowing, and they stared out of their sockets with spastic abandon.
Chin, Dark Lord, why have you come to torment me? Have you come to send me to the abyss?
Frank asked, paralyzed with fear. Now Frank lived across a back street from a morbidly obese lady called Mrs. Montand, who pretended to be a widowed pole dancer, but really was a PETA agent, determined to catch Frank in the act of animal abuse. She was, however, actually widowed. The part is true. She had also had a miscarriage. She observed Frank through a humongous telescope, which was really quite unnecessary because the back of the street was only 5 feet wide and their windows directly faced each other. She would sit for hours watching Frank like comatose from huffing Jenkum, just as he would sit for hours keeping a protective eye on that 10-year-old boy with the nice little ass living across the street in front of his apartment. She befriended Frank by telling him she was simply checking on his fiber intake and occasionally throwing fruit through his window, whether it was open at the time or not. When she saw the horrors of Chin Chin unfolding in Frank's room, she threw open her window and cried out for mercy. "Leave him alone, he's just a boy." Within moments, other neighbors with similarly large telescopes were throwing their windows open and hurling their emotive pleas toward the Dark Lord, and soon the whole Black Alley echoed with the words, "He's just a boy." Much like any Italian neighborhood. "Oh, Chin Chin," the Dark Lord continued with his demands.
"But I have made the sacrifices you asked for,"
said Frank.
"The blood and pubic hair and nail clippings of 1,000 youths were all duly provided with video evidence. I can show you right now." "Why do you need extra sacrifices? Weren't those I made enough?"
Frank was quivering with trepidation. "Oh, Chin Chin. Oh, Chin Chin."
"I swear I have no more. I have given you everything I had. I have no more chromosomes to give."
"He's just a boy." The cries continued to ring out through the alleyways and over the building tops. "Oh, Chin Chin dies sucking." He placed his hand on Frank's trembling heart and absorbed the remaining chromosomes from him. With that, he quickly crawled back into his giant wet ceiling pussy, leaving Frank a quivering empty shell on the bed. Once the shockwaves had subsided and the space-time continuum had returned back to normal, fear departed and life returned to normal in Frank's bedroom. That is, Frank sat on his bed and scratched his balls. He looked around to reorient himself. Then, very faintly, the first other activity began around the room. Initially, it started with just the lightest of movements from the cupboard door. It budged just a fraction, then a fraction more. Then it peeped ajar. Finally, the door swung open, and out jumped a semi-naked little runt carrying some rosary beads.
"Alpha Centaurian!"
Frank exclaimed.
"Good to see you, old friend. Thanks for your support a minute ago when Chin Chin was here."
He waddled over to Frank and sat on the bed beside him. Good to see you, Frank. Frank, you fucking tool. Good thing I wasn't here a minute ago when the Dark Lord was here, or I would have snapped his dick in two. I would have pounded those creepy black eyes of his all the way back to his head, and I would have reached into his chest and pulled out his still beating heart, and held it to his face so he can see how black it is.
Alpha Centaurian, what are you talking about? I saw you hiding in the cupboard. Also, you owe me money. You came up short.
The clock on the wall suddenly opened up from it. From it, a tiny wrinkled human stuck his head out and said,
That was a great joke, Frank. 7 out of 10.
They aggressively winked at each other. The little guy returned back into the clock, never to be heard from again. Before the runt could respond, the bedroom door swung open, and the sound of disabled grunts, and in hopped a demented-looking guy, pink from head to toe.
Pink guy, it's you! You're here too? You made it. You just missed all the action, by the way. You're a pussy, too, you know that? You're an Alpha Centaurian. You're both a couple of pussies. Leaving me to face Chin Chin all on my own. It was pretty scary for a while.
On hearing the Dark Lord's name, Pink Eye's eyes were stunned wide open. He could not understand how Frank ever had the courage to say Chin Chin's name out loud. At that moment, a rustling noise came from under Frank's bed.
Come on, Salamander Man, I know it's you.
Yes, came in reply as a huge humanoid salamander peeped out from under the bed.
Salamander Man, what are you doing on my bed? Have you any idea what filth lays under there? I'll tell you, there's some nasty stuff down there.
Yes. He pulled himself fully out and immediately began to caress his nipples. He was now completely back to his normal self. All his lacerations he had healed, and his nipples were back to full erection. Whatever wretched woundings had previously disturbed him, he was now back to his normal, cheerful self again. Yes! He cried, and immediately inserted a recorder into his left nostril, and broke into a rousing rendition of a tune from his glory days. Before Alpha Centaurian could start dancing to the music, or Frank could compliment him on his playing, or his general good looks, and sick moves, the door kicked wide open, and in strolled a strange Japanese man wearing a brown spectacles, and a Hawaiian shirt and a safari hat.
Wow!
He declared.
Wow, Frank, good! Safari Man!
Frank cried, ecstatic that his whole posse was reunited once again.
I thought you were still back in...
No. Let's not go there. Surface to say, being married to a Neji was never going to work for someone like me. She had no pussy. Can you imagine aggressively trying to make a dent in a dry wall with your dick? Not for me. He was shadowed by a drone, who hovered just above his left shoulder. Frank gestured for all of them to come back together. They embraced in a tight and passionate group hug, with Alpha Centaurian burrowing with pleasure into Pink Guy's thighs. With the 6 of them now together, the circus was much complete again, and there was much rejoicing until late that night, with the laughing and dancehall and general scat. But Frank's dilemma remained, and his interest was piqued. He was still capable of multiplying his chromosomes, and he was still greatly troubled by this. Not merely the capability, but the reasoning behind it. Why would any god want to see the multiplication of his chromosomes and no one else's? Why had Chinchin, the all-powerful god, chosen him? Why was Frank so verbally and sexually aggressive all the time? He was no closer to finding out why. There had to be more beyond the Peace Lords. There had to be an ultimate god. Frank was more determined now than ever to find him, confront him, and demand the answers to his questions. And so his quest became all-consuming. But this, by no means, where it had began.